Welcome to MEDENT Minutes, the podcast that explores EHR optimization and how practices can excel in value-based care. I'm Megan Chapman, the Director of Marketing and Communications here at MEDENT, and today we are talking about MIPS with Patient 360 COO Amanda Lord Darbani and MEDENT MIPS specialists Jenna Sorendo, Judi Dorsey, and Patrick Stevens. We also have a special guest today, Lauren Roach. She is the Quality Program Coordinator at Premier Medical, and she has been working with MEDENT and Patient 360 for some time. And I just want to thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so before we get started, I'm going to start, with Amanda here. Can you just tell me a little bit about Patient 360 and its partnership with MEDENT before we get into, what's changing in 2024?
Sure, happy to. This has been an exciting partnership that crystallized, just over, I'd say Jenna and Judi, but 5 years now, almost 6. And if we're going by performance periods, it would be 5 performance periods, but 6 years since we've been working in partnership with MEDENT. And so it's been pretty exciting and a lot of developments over time. We have successfully submitted MIPS data for probably at this point over 80 TINs, 80 MEDENT TINs specifically this year. And so that number has risen in the last 5 years. I mean, I remember when we first started, it was a small cluster of TINs, about 10 or so. And then it's just continued to grow over the years as the partnership has grown and as the integration has become more successful. And we have more satisfied clients that just really like the idea that they don't have to worry about uploading their data manually. And they have all of us folks behind the scenes really working together in unison to make their data submission successful. It's been a long evolution of the program, and so we at Patient 360 and MEDENT have successfully evolved with the program. So both sets of teams have we've taken a lot of time to munge through the final rule every year, look at the ECQM and CQM updates, and really make sure that we're prepared for success each year to be able to submit data on behalf of all MEDENT clients. The real beauty of the partnership and what clients appreciate the most is our personalized service. For sure, can't tell you how many times we have clients that say, we so appreciate the collaboration of both teams and the fact that you all work with us in such a personal way. The service is 100% top notch. And it's on both teams, right? So kudos to both of us, right? It's not just one vendor. A lot of times in partnerships, sometimes one vendor is doing more than the other on behalf of the client. But in this case, with the MEDENT Patient 360 partnership, it really is a collaborative relationship with the clients, and both vendors really shine in terms of the service that they provide to clients. And this really helps because it allows us to be able to push over a lot more data, work with clients more consistently, and provide them with really top-notch service. So it's been an awesome partnership, and we're looking forward to another 5 years, another 10 years as the program continues to evolve.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm going to put Lauren on the spot here. So Lauren, would you agree? I mean, you've been a client, you've worked with both of us for some time, and I was curious to just hear your perspective on how things have been going.
Absolutely. I can't thank Jenna and Amanda and really everyone on both sides. Exactly what Amanda said, the collaboration and the teamwork. Both sides are really on top of pushing the clients to score as well as they can, even with the ever-changing, surprises that may come from CMS at times. They're so flexible and make themselves available at any time to really support their clients. So I can back what Amanda is saying 1000%.
Awesome. Well, that's what we like to hear. And Amanda, I know we're just, we're getting closer to that submission deadline for 2023. And I was just wondering if you could give me just a quick recap of what you've seen so far.
Yes, we are in the home stretch, and it feels good. We have actually 3 entities. So we operate under the space of 2 QCDRs and 1 qualified registry. So we've been around since, the beginning of the program. So now I'm going back, I'm dating myself, but this program started actually prior to MIPS. It was PQRS, and then before that it was PQRI, right? So if we look back to how long Patient 360 has existed, It's around about 2009, so long time. So over time, we have expanded into 2 QCDR and 1 qualified registry entity. And we submit data for thousands of providers across multiple TINs nationwide. So we're about, I'd say 85 to 90% complete with our 2023 submission. So the CMS deadline is the end of March, typically every year. Our deadline, our internal deadline is 30 days prior to that deadline. And that is for a number of reasons, namely being that the last month pushing data to the CMS portal can be very slow moving because a lot of folks wait until the last minute. So we protect our clients and really get the data in early so that there's time to do review, remediation, manage our last minute clients who might need extra assistance. So at about 85%, that's looking really good here at the end of February, early March for our 2023 submissions at this point. We feel fairly confident that about 95% of our organizations are going to pass MIPS. Now, it's harder to tell this year simply because, as most folks are probably aware, that cost category is calculated by CMS after submissions, usually in the summer. And a lot of folks the last 2 or 3 years due to COVID have been either applying for the extreme and uncontrollable circumstances hardship for the cost category, which has reweighted it, or they are automatically reweighted for cost, right? So in the last couple of years, it's been really hard for folks to look at what they have achieved for a cost score because it's been pretty much neutral and reweighted over to other categories due to COVID. Now that we're coming out of that, what's happening is more folks are going to get the cost category calculated. But even with that calculation, we still feel very confident in what we're seeing for quality scores and improvement activities and promoting interoperability, still seeing really good scores across the board there. That allows for there to be less pressure on the cost category and receiving a high score for that. So we're still fairly confident that almost all of our organizations are going to pass MIPS or come very, very close to it. And more than likely, based on what we've seen results over the last couple of years, we're looking at probably about a 75% of our base getting some sort of bonus. Now, the bonuses change year to year, and we present all sorts of information during our sessions that we have, our lunch and learn sessions with MEDENT regarding bonuses and understanding a budget neutral program. But more than likely, we're looking at about 75% of our client base receiving some sort of bonus. Now, they've removed the exceptional bonus option. So it's just if you get above 75 points for the program in total, you're going to get some kind of a bonus. But if you get above 89 points, it used to be that you'd get an exceptional bonus. Now it's just anything above 75, you'll get some sort of a bonus. The closer you are to 100, that's where you see the higher bonuses coming in. Last year was about those folks that came in at 100%, so had perfect scores, they got about an 8.33% positive payment adjustment. So that was pretty good. Folks in the 90s, we're looking at 5 or 6% bonus from last year. And then, you know, if you're in the 80s, tinier, much smaller bonuses, but still something is good. So, yeah. And then MVPs have come into play. Now, we've only had a couple of our TINs because, you know, the nature of this program is they launch something new and then everyone kind of waits until they really see that it's definitely crystallized and become real, quote unquote, if you will. So MVPs are real, but folks are kind of waiting it out. I think we did 2 MVP submissions for 2023, and then we've got like 1 or 2 clients for 2024 that are interested. I think we'll see the bulk of our interest and participation for MVPs in 2025.
Okay, and so there are some big changes coming for 2024, and I was just wondering if you could chat a little bit about the changes, what this means for practices, and you know, Jenna, Judi, Patrick, you know, feel free to chime in, you know, from the MEDENT perspective as well. But if you guys could just fill me in on some of the updates that people need to know for 2024.
Sure, I can start off, and then I'll probably pull in Patrick because he's got a lot of insight into some of these new requirements. But I would tell you that now data completeness requirement has increased, but for MEDENT clients, that's not so much of an issue. And here's why. MEDENT clients mostly submit what's called ECQM QRDA1 measures to us, and some CQMs, but for the most part, it's all coming over machine to machine with no manual manipulation via QRDA1 files. And when that happens. And I know that's kind of tech talk, but the gist of it is when the data is sent to us that way, it is 100% complete because it's coming over machine to machine, EHR to registry. So there's not an option to manually manipulate that data, which means that it's automatically meeting 100% data completeness requirements. So it's important to know that data completeness requirements have increased. It's important knowledge for the program overall. But the good thing and the important thing to know is that if you're a MEDENT client, you don't necessarily have to worry about that increase because you're always at 100% of data completeness when you're utilizing the MEDENT integration, which is the beauty of the integration. So that is one change for folks to just be aware of policy-wise, but for MEDENT folks, not really going to impact you because all of your data is coming over at a 100% completeness anyway, so that's fantastic. The one thing I do think is important to note, and definitely Patrick will probably have something to say about this as well, because he's working with folks day in and day out with understanding how to document and report measures within MEDENT so that they push over successfully to Patient 360, are that there's a lot of measures for 2024 that are topped out, that are becoming retired. We've gone through the full benchmarks that CMS released at the end of January or so. They release every year in January, the benchmarks. A lot of measures were suppressed in 2022. And because of those suppressions, the 2024 benchmarks that we're seeing, they're going to be at no benchmark, and they're going to use a performance period benchmark because of the suppression. So we'd have to have an entire separate podcast on helping folks understand benchmarks because it's very nuanced and complex. It's peeling away multiple layers of an onion. There's a lot to unpack when it comes to benchmarks. But what is a metaphor or a way to explain benchmarks is similar to the rest of the program where everything kind of lags, right? So your payment adjustments lag by a couple of years, the benchmarks lag, everything's sort of behind. So you're always kind of operating in and out of a couple of different years. With benchmarks, when we say historical benchmarks, those are established for 2024 in 2022. So you're really utilizing the performance data of 2022 to determine what the benchmarks are going to show up and how your measures, what they're going to be calculated at in 2024. Again, super complex. There's a lot more involved in it, but just know that when you're looking at benchmarks here in 2024, it's representing data that was established back in 2022. And so that's changed a lot because there were a lot of measures that were suppressed in 2022 due to ICD-10 code changes late in the year. There's a lot of measures that are becoming topped out, right? And what does topped out mean? Essentially, it means no matter how well you do on the measure, you can only get a certain number of points on that measure because everyone has been submitting it year over year and it's been they've been doing super well on it. Now, how inflated that is, there are some folks that submit data manually, and that's not MEDENT folks, but when data is submitted manually, there is the ability to submit data that is 100% perfect. When that happens too much over time, that's what causes a measure to be topped out and retired. So we are seeing for sure in 2024, fewer benchmarks, use of more performance period benchmarks. So what that results in are that more and more we're seeing trending, more and more QCDR measures are becoming available and those are trending. So as a QCDR, we have our own measures that have been approved by CMS, and we have other entities and other QCDR stewards that we work with where we are in partnership with, where other folks can borrow those QCDR measures. Typically, QCDR measures are outcomes-based measures, which CMS prefers, and they're more meaningful, right? They're not just ticking off a box to say I did this or I didn't. It's more looking at outcomes-based reporting for the patients. So that's trending for 2024 and beyond for sure, the use of QCDR measures. And then of course the MVP adoption, while it's slow, I think it's going to become much more important in 2025 and beyond. So those are some of the biggest changes that I'm seeing, but the biggest one being the measures being topped out and a lot of benchmarks using performance period benchmarks. Patrick, is there anything that you're thinking about in terms of the measures that are topped out or benchmarks?
Absolutely. So going along with it, not just measures being topped out, you did mention briefly as well some measures being removed. So there are some very popular measures that were removed this year. In addition, some measures were moved to be exclusively in the MVP program. I know we briefly touched on that as being a new reporting model earlier. CMS is trying to take measures out of MIPS and move them over to MVP, making it so that practices will be more likely to try to switch since they don't have so many options available in the original program. We've also seen some cases of measures being merged. For example, the tobacco measures this year were combined into one, whereas previously you could have two separate measures scoring on just two separate populations of patients. So it is important that clients are looking into the measures that are available to them, making sure they have enough to pick out, and then if they don't, that they're looking into them early so they can get any documentation requirements set up to still have enough measures to report on as CMS continues to make it harder and harder to stick with what they've been doing in prior years.
Yeah, and I mean, based on that too, are there any, specific measures that we've come across, existing measures that have been especially challenging for practices to document and report?
There are quite a few. It's hard to give examples in a sense that would be relevant to all clients since a lot of them are very specialty specific. But some general types of issues I see with them are there are specialties like ophthalmology, for example, that tend to struggle with measures that require, explicit data points. And they're a specialty that very frequently tends to free text because they want specificity for each patient. So it's a matter of making sure they know to document properly in a way that CMS requires, even though it doesn't necessarily fit the way their specialty tends to operate.
Oh yeah, that must be frustrating.
Yep, and for that reason, I always advise if clients are seeing scores that seem abnormally low based on what they know they're doing with patients, always reach out to us early. We can do a content review. We can go over what does and doesn't count. We can try to find the easiest way to connect what they're currently doing to what CMS is looking for to make sure they're getting their credit with as little change as possible so they can still focus on patient care.
Awesome.
Absolutely. I just want to reiterate that choosing and reviewing your measures early and knowing which ones that your practice already focuses on, that's definitely going to be the most important thing, because the worse the benchmarks are for the practice, the harder it is going to be to achieve that particular measure, like Amanda had said previously. So picking them early to kind of figure out what you want to focus on, maybe picking a couple extras because it's not a perfect world and sometimes things change. So it's definitely going to be helpful in the long run to know early on how you're going to be documenting so that we don't scramble at the end of the year trying to fix things.
Yeah, and speaking of measure changes, a lot of measures I think folks don't know behind the scenes that year over year, it's not just like we can copy stuff over and repeat and rinse and repeat. We can with some measures, but a lot of measures have a higher level of complexity and are changed quite a bit and quite significantly by CMS, right? And so that final rule doesn't come out every year until November. So mostly everyone is scrambling at that time to look at, well, what have the coding, what ICD codes have been added, CPT code changes, updates to the measure, significant changes. Then we have to, behind the scenes, scramble and get those measures recoded according to the next year's specification. So that does take typically some time within the first quarter to make those updates to the measures that have changed significantly. So sometimes there are delays in seeing an actual score on the dashboard during the first quarter because we're all calculating in the background all the changes that have been made to some of the more complex measures within the program. So that does take a little bit of time. Usually by second quarter, you'd start to see all the data that's available. First quarter, it comes in chunks, if you will, like certain measures that are easy, haven't changed, those start appearing first. And then the more complex measures appear over time throughout the first quarter.
Amanda, if you don't mind, I just want to chime in. I know you mentioned it, but from a client perspective, I just really want to put emphasis on the fact that by collaborating with both Patient 360 and MEDENT, you, as a client, you open up what measures you can report, and that was huge for us. So, working with Patient 360 as well, because they're a registry, it opens up the pool of measures that you can report, which is huge.
Great, thanks, Lauren. Yeah, and are there any measures that are not integrated that need to be documented in a certain way? Or, I mean, I know you mentioned that things you guys tend to make updates behind the scenes throughout the first quarter, but are there any measures not fully integrated right now?
So the MEDENT manual every year is updated to show which measures are updated and ready for integration and automation. And Patrick and Team MEDENT can speak more to the MEDENT manual, but that's updated on an annual basis. And I'd say the only ones are maybe measures that are brand new that have only just been released. Some measures that are underutilized, that literally there are no specialties, the measure exists, but like no one uses it. So sometimes those aren't automated because no one's ever asked for them. And then some of our QCDR measures, again, because they're not CMS measures, they're stewarded by particular QCDRs, those take more time for programming. So when we have interest in folks using QCDR measures, we then share that information with MEDENT, and then we determine internally if we can have those specifications updated for coding for automation. But if we can't have the automation in place, we do have templates available that folks can use to be able to load the data onto the template. So they'd still be able to report the QCDR measures if they're tracking the outcomes data within MEDENT.
And to follow up to that, the documentation in MEDENT is still just as important, even if you're using, if you happen to use a template that you're uploading, because if it's not documented in a structured format, it will be much more complicated to extract that data out of your system. So as long as the data is in a structured field and it matches with what the specification is asking for and the content is clear and readable, we could definitely assist with gathering the patient population and things like that and some of the data points that are needed for the numerator. The responsibility is still on the practice to be able to import that template, and I can do as much as I can to help with that process. As much as we can, we use all the integrated measures first and foremost. It's a little bit complicated to get the data out of the system using a template, but using a DM report, depending on the measure. Some measures get a little more complicated than others, but it's still possible. It's just not widely used. We try to have as many measures available for integration as possible. And if there's one that's not available, requesting it and showing where you're documenting now, and if updates need to be made so that we can make it integrated, knowing sooner is definitely helpful, because then you can get the best score possible.
And how can practices request measures for programming and automation?
They can send in a support ticket and request them, specific measure IDs that they are interested in. And, we do try to take all requests, if we can. This process of updating the measures or developing new measures does take time. And we have a whole validation process that, it's not an instantaneous thing. But we do try our best to meet all of the requests.
We do also try to track as well the level of interest in requests so that we can try to prioritize measures that more practices want and get them up and running sooner, which is why we do also recommend when sending in requests, try to focus on the measures that are most applicable to your practice. Try to focus in on one or two measures that are going to be really important, really crucial for you scoring well, as opposed to just sending every measure that may be slightly relevant. And in addition to that, when you are going over the measures, make sure that you're looking into the specificity for the documentation, and that, again, we have structured data, meaning that it's inside of a component, it's inside of some sort of code in the system that can be easily read. It's not just being typed into a box, or it's not just being entered under a general code.
Okay, and of course, when we say please send a support ticket, we mean you can go to medent.com and click the support tab and submit your support ticket online. That is the best way to make your request and the best way to reach our MEDENT support team here. And just kind of to, maybe start wrapping things up a little bit, are there any areas of MEDENT or Patient 360 that you guys feel are being underutilized right now that you would like to see more people using?
So I can tap in on T360 dashboard, and then Patrick, I know, will have definitely information on that side of things for sure. I'll be quick and just want to say that when folks log in early and often to the Patient 360 dashboard, that provides a lot of useful analytics. What we tend to see is folks waiting until the fall to even log in for the first time to Patient 360 to see and monitor their data. When you log in so late in the year, it doesn't allow much opportunity to actually improve in your quality of care or your documentation in real time, which is the idea and the purpose of having data automated and pushing over on a nightly basis, is so that you can monitor it early and often. Obviously, the first quarter, there's a lot of changes that are being made. So that's the time to, you're not paying as much attention in the first quarter because we're still doing submissions for 2023 now anyway. But starting at the beginning of the second quarter, that's when we think that our dashboard is being underutilized. Sometimes people just wait for us to send the feedback reports, which is fine. Those come out once a quarter. But if you're not logging in more often, it just doesn't allow you as much opportunity to catch any issues that might arise, patients that are not met, for example. If you see those early on, you can work with MEDENT to determine if it's a documentation issue and then get that fixed relatively quickly, rather than waiting until November or December and seeing a swath of not met patients and wondering why they're all not met. But it allows for very little time. It permits very little time to be able to make corrections and documentation when it's that late in the year. So that's what I would say is the most underutilized, is the Patient 360 dashboard and folks consistently logging in to monitor their data.
Yes, and from the MEDENT side, what I'd really say, there are 3 features I would recommend that practices start to utilize more if they're not already. These features are based on automation or assistive recommendations for the provider, since one of the biggest issues I tend to see with providers is just remembering to really check off the boxes they need to check for MIPS in order to meet their credit. Since, of course, when they're in the room with the patient, their focus is the patient's care, not necessarily on the reporting program associated with it. The features I would recommend most, number 1 would be the DMHM alerts, which will let them know when they enter in the chart or even visible within their sidebar as to which metrics the patient is eligible for and which of those metrics have already been met for the year. A lot of times providers will have these set up but may not be taking full advantage of them and end up missing a lot of patients that they later have to go back and correct if they still want to score well. The other 2 features are more on the automation side of things, and these would be care plan packages as well as care plan quick picks. Since a lot of measures are diagnosis driven, we can have features in the background that are watching for the presence of these codes, and then when the provider selects a corresponding code, a plan package can recommend the creation of certain records. For example, a measure may require a lab test for a patient to occur once annually. We can have that lab test suggested to the provider every time they enter that code to make sure they can't forget to do it, and to also speed up the process of entering the lab test itself. Additionally, some are more screening based, so we may have a measure like a dermatology measure for psoriasis may be assessing the disease activity of a patient. We can have the care plan of that provider's note automatically pull in the components for screening when they use the code, so that every time they're selecting psoriasis, they're going to see, I should assess the disease activity. I can put it right in here. It's ready for me to go.
Wow, Patrick, we should probably set up some kind of webinar or something with you, because that really sounds like a lot of features that would be really beneficial to a lot of clients that, it sounds like, not many people may be using all of these features. So, wow, yeah.
We certainly have some that are, and I do see a big difference in how they score versus the providers that don't use these features.
Yeah, that's
Definitely
really interesting.
We see it on our end as well. We so much so that we're pulling Patrick into a webinar that we're hosting for all MEDENT clients on March 20th to be able to talk about this specifically with measures and like utilization of documentation in MEDENT. So I'm excited that you're going to be joining us, Patrick.
Yeah, and then just before I wrap everything up here, my last question was just, is there any advice for audits? I know, Amanda, we were talking a little bit about that earlier before we started recording here. So is there any advice you have come audit season?
I mean, no one likes
Jenna and Judi as well. Yeah.
They're never fun. Audits are audits. They have to be done. It's part of, compliance and general hygiene of your data. And it's just part of what we do with CMS. It's better to get internally audited by Patient 360, right? Because it's part of our compliance. And it's our job to see you successful. So for our purposes of our internal audits that we have to conduct in order to remain compliant as a QCDR according to CMS, it's actually better. You want to be audited by P360 rather than CMS, because we're looking for you to be successful. So our main goal when we're conducting the audits is to make it as painless as possible and to detect and correct, right? So what we do is we detect any issues, and if there are issues, we work with the client to correct those issues prior to submissions so that there are no issues with CMS. If you are ever audited by CMS, your data is nice and clean, right? We've gone through best practices. We've practice good hygiene with the data by conducting these audits and detecting and correcting everything prior to submission. So if you are ever audited by P360, don't panic. This is a natural part of the process. Again, It's not like we like audits. No one wants to, we don't want to do them, and we certainly know that you don't want to, but it's better to have the audit done by the entity and organization that wants to see you successful and that is rooting for you, right? So we're going to detect and correct and assist you if there are any issues with documentation prior to submissions to CMS. Judi, Jenna, anything to add?
I think the only thing that I would add is that really all the quality data, that portion is done directly from the charts. The integration process comes right from the patient chart. So there's not a ton that needs to be like kept for in case of an audit in terms of a CMS audit, because that stuff is already in your patient chart. That's where it's coming from to begin with. But in terms of like improvement activities and PI, knowing what you're reporting and like being able to track that stuff and take screenshots or reports or whatever is needed for those measures, that might be more helpful in terms of audits and what you need to save, because those ask for different types of things that are not you know, maybe an example here is like your electronic case reporting. I feel like a lot of practices aren't sure whether or not they're doing that, and they kind of scramble at the end of the year to try to figure it out. I'm not sure what you need in case of an audit, but knowing in advance of what they're doing before to not scramble, and knowing who they're reporting to, because that's a required thing. So those are some things that I would think about going into keeping things in case of an audit, making sure you know what you're going to attest to begin with, and having that readily available.
And if it's ever on your mind, if folks want to know more about, well, what would CMS audit for, on the qpp.cms.gov website, there's actually documentation. It's called data validation information that tells you if you're to be audited by CMS, this is what they would look for. So if anybody ever wants to get a hold of that, just let us know, because we have easy access to that. It's basically a large Excel file, right, that talks about, well, if you're audited for this particular promoting interoperability measure, this is what CMS would want you to be able to show as far as documentation. It spells it out for you in that document. So there is information available about what CMS would be looking for if you were ever to be audited by CMS. But as far as an internal audit from Patient 360, we're very clear about what we're asking clients for, and we're very accessible, right? So if you're audited by P360, it's not in a vacuum. You'll have direct contact to our staff members that will assist you and walk with you shoulder to shoulder through the process to make sure that we're making the process as simple for you as possible and as pain-free as an audit can be. I mean, if we can associate pain-free with audits, right? They're not fun, no one wants to do them, but like I said, P360 wants to see you successful, so we're looking to detect and correct any issues prior to submissions.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. And, you know, is there anything else we didn't touch on that anyone wants to chime in about?
Oh, our lunch and learns are coming up. Where for all MEDENT clients, where we assist them with 2024. So, and I know Megan, you're going to be sending out information on those tomorrow and in the coming weeks, but we have it on March 6th and March 20th. The first one is going to be just general about 2024 and how to prepare. That's on March 6th from noon to 1 Eastern. And then March 20th will be more specific measure information. And Patrick's going to be on that. Boy, he'll be a shining star for that one. And that's going to be on March 20th from noon to 1 Eastern. And we're recording both in case you can't make it, because we know that, you know, you're probably with patients and attending a lunch and learn about MIPS isn't always top priority. So that's why we're going to record it for you too, so that you'll have access to these lunch and learn sessions at any point in time that you need them.
Absolutely. I was just going to mention that both are recorded and will be on our website, available for those who cannot join us live.
Awesome. Thanks, Megan.
All right. Thank you, everyone. And yeah, hopefully the, you know, performance year 2024 goes well with all these changes, but it sounds like our teams are on top of it. So that's what we like to hear.
We've got this. 2024, we're here.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you.